On this episode of Tennessee Court Talk, we are going to dive further into the roles of clerks in the Tennessee judiciary and are happy to welcome Supreme Court Clerk Jim Hivner to the podcast. Mr. Hivner was appointed in his first 6-year term as the clerk of the Supreme Court of Tennessee in 2014 and reappointed in 2020. Before serving as the Supreme Court clerk, Mr. Hivner was in private practice for almost 20 years and served 2 years as the Chief Administrative Officer of the Shelby County Chancery Court. Jim, welcome to Tennessee Court Talk.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We recently sat down with Knox County Criminal Court Clerk Mike Hammond and learned how that position is an elected position and how that job is structured within county government. Can you explain your position and how it differs?
Sure. So the Supreme Court Clerk is a constitutional officer, and I am appointed, or the Supreme Court Clerk is appointed by the Supreme Court for a 6-year term. So it's different because the Supreme Court Clerk is a state officer, not a county officer. The trial court clerks are all county officials.
And like many positions in the judiciary, there are many, many paths that you can take to be appointed to a position. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led to your appointment?
So I grew up in West Tennessee. I went to high school there and then went to undergrad at UT Knoxville. I got an accounting degree there, and actually when I graduated from UT Knoxville, I took a job in Huntsville, Alabama with NASA. And I was working at NASA for a couple of years before I had decided to attend law school. I attended law school in Alabama at the University of Alabama. And when I graduated from there, I had already been married and had a child and decided to open my own practice in North Alabama, in Florence, Alabama, and started practicing law in Florence, Alabama. At the time, I also was getting an LLM in tax from the University of Alabama. So I had a busy about 7.5 years between practicing law, raising a family, and getting an LLM in tax. So after about 7 years, I decided I wanted to do something different other than trying to struggle through practicing law on my own. So I sought a position and found a position back in the Memphis area in West Tennessee, where I grew up, and came back and went to work for a law firm in Memphis, and actually worked with 2 different law firms for about a 12-year period before I actually took a position in the court system. I decided to make a career shift and became the Chief Administrative Officer of the Chancery Court Clerk's Office in Shelby County, Tennessee. I was there for a couple of years and was very busy with implementing e-filing and other activities within that office when my predecessor in this position, Mike Catalano, retired, and this position became available. That was in 2012. And so I applied and went through the interview process, and the Supreme Court appointed me at that time to this position. And I've been here for just over 10 years now.
Lots of people will only see you in a courtroom calling court to order for the Supreme Court. How does your role differ in and out of the courtroom?
So it's really hugely different. Most of my work is outside of the courtroom. The bulk of my work is actually in managing the paperwork and all of the filings and pleadings and other aspects of the case files or case records for all of the appeals and other cases that are initiated in the appellate courts. And we have thousands of cases. And so I'm no different than any other clerk throughout the state who manages the paperwork for their court system. So that is the bulk of the work that we do. We also, other clerks in the state, we have a docket. And so we prepare the dockets for the 3 different appellate courts. We have communications with the attorneys and the litigants and the judges. And so I spend the bulk of my time working on those types of administrative matters associated with the appeals and other cases in the court system. But then as the clerk of the appellate courts, the Supreme Court asked me to take on different roles. I serve on different boards, including the building committee boards for each of the buildings in the Supreme Court buildings in the state. And we have 3 Supreme Court buildings. And so I'm very active in helping to manage the buildings and in other aspects or other different committees. And I've been very active in in implementing technology for the state in the court system.
So Tennessee's appellate court system is unique in having the 3 grand divisions. What staff do you have in place to accommodate all those divisions?
Sure. So I have 29 staff individuals across the state who serve in different roles. And so I have staff in each of the grand divisions. And since we have a Supreme Court building in each grand division, they are located in those buildings. We are unique as a state, but we're not completely unique. I mean, other states also, even though they're not necessarily divided in 3 grand divisions, other states have appellate divisions in their state. California has multiple appellate divisions. They have one Supreme Court, like we do, but their Supreme Court typically just sits in their one location, but they may do special sittings other places. And so other states do similar stuff. They're just not designed exactly the way that we are. In Tennessee, as we noted, we do have 3 grand divisions. And so my staff in each grand division keep up with the cases for that grand division. And in the middle division, we also have some staff who help with administrative matters because the Supreme Court has a lot of administrative work that they do on behalf of the state judicial department, and my staff primarily in the middle division work on those administrative matters and maintain the paperwork associated with that.
What other courts does your office provide a clerk for?
The Supreme Court clerk is appointed by the Supreme Court, but also has the responsibility to serve as the clerk for the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Court of Appeals, and also serves as the clerk for the Board of Judicial Conduct. Now, the activity associated with the Board of Judicial Conduct is very limited because it's only when formal charges are made against a judge that really becomes active in my office. But we do have some administrative role that we play throughout the year. But primarily the work that we do is for the 3 appellate courts, being the Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Court of Appeals.
When someone files an appeal above the trial court level, how does that appeal make it to an intermediate appellate court through the clerk's office?
So this has sort of transitioned over the years, the paperwork process. For many years, if you were filing what we refer to as a notice of appeal, you would file it in the trial court, and then that would be sent to us by the trial court, sent to the appellate court by the trial court. Other types of appeals besides what we refer to as Rule 3 appeals would be sent directly to the appellate court. Today, after we implemented e-filing, or right before we implemented e-filing, we kind of changed the process to make it easier for the implementation of e-filing. And now all case initiations are sent directly to the Court of Appeals, to the appellate courts, whether it be the Court of Appeals, Court of Criminal Appeals, or Supreme Court, whatever documentation is necessary to initiate a case is sent directly to us.
When you say e-file, are we talking just a simple email with everything they need, or is there a software process to happen?
So that's a great question. So in Tennessee, we really are only authorized to utilize software for e-filing purposes. Email is really not a recognized method for e-filing. Having said that, in 2018, the appellate courts implemented e-filing. And we have a software system, and we have many attorneys and litigants who utilize our software system to submit their documentation, their pleadings, briefs, case initiation documentation, other documentation to us. And we actually prefer that they utilize our e-filing system, and I think that's what many people are starting to do because we're trying to become a less paper environment. So we're very pleased with our software e-filing system, and I think it's really working well.
You and I worked together a lot during the COVID pandemic when all 3 appellate courts were live streaming oral arguments via Zoom and being live streamed on YouTube. You may have sort of already answered this question with e-filing, but how have different aspects of your office changed since remote hearings and e-filing have come into play?
So that's a great question, and I think you're right that COVID did have a major impact on all of that. We implemented e-filing before the COVID era, before the pandemic hit, and our intent was to try to transition and utilize technology to create a more efficient and effective means for our citizens to interact with the appellate courts and the appellate court clerk's office. COVID did provide us an opportunity to really think broadly about how we provide the judicial department services to the citizens of the state, and whether, what we are required to do and responsible for doing, whether that can be accomplished by utilizing other technology, because we were required to do that. And so today we actually do provide some other services. We live stream our events as a result of all the activity that was associated with COVID. We do utilize more remote hearings now than we did before. We're still struggling. Shouldn't say struggling, but we're still working through how to ensure that whatever we're doing utilizing technology today doesn't negatively impact the citizens of the state and their ability to access the court system.
I can speak to some of that live streaming and say that I know the Supreme Court in general has been extremely supportive of anything we can do to make it more accessible for a lawyer to show up and to be heard during oral arguments, whether that be in person, virtual. They've always been supportive of our office, making sure that we have the technology to get a lawyer there on time and whatever they need to do that.
Well, and your office has done a fantastic job of helping us to figure out the best ways to utilize the technology. And so, as you know, today we're able to do complete digital hearings, or we can do hybrid hearings where one judge who can't make it actually can participate remotely, or a litigant can participate remotely. So it's amazing how we actually have learned how to utilize the technology and make the best use of it so that everybody can participate fully.
It's always been nice that when you call or some other clerk calls and says, hey, this judge wants to appear virtually, and I say, well, I need a minute, or I might need some supplies, it's never an issue. It's like, yep, just start working and we'll get you what you need. What's one thing you would like the average Tennessean to know about our judicial system?
Well, I think that most people learn about the judicial system by watching TV or watching movies, and what you typically see is a judge and lawyers in a court. And I think what's important and I hope that our citizens understand, is that there are a whole lot of people that work behind the scenes to ensure that the judicial department works well, and that we are trying to create an environment where actually justice can be accomplished for the citizens of the state. And so we have great law schools that train our lawyers. We have great lawyers that serve as staff attorneys, law clerks. We have clerks and the staff in all the clerks' offices. We have administrative personnel that serve many different roles in our state, whether at the county level or at the state level. We have media personnel like you, Nick, who do a great job in helping us to educate our citizens by helping us stream our proceedings or do these podcasts or whatever we're doing to try to make us more accessible to the community at large. We even have maintenance staff who help us keep our buildings going, and because we couldn't do the things that we do if we didn't have the locations, our courthouses and those things. So there's a lot of people that are actually working very hard every day to ensure that the judicial department is working for the state.
So for people listening across the state who are just now learning about you or your job or our system, I have a couple fun questions for you. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
That's a really hard question, Nick. So I've thought about this before, and, with great power comes great responsibilities. So I'm not sure that I need any powers, but sometimes I wish that I had the power to heal people. So if I really had a great superpower, it would be the power to provide healing. But the problem with that, once you get a superpower, that everybody wants to utilize it, and then I'll be standing in line just healing everybody. So I'm not sure if that's the superpower that I want or not.
What's your idea of a perfect vacation?
You know, the most enjoyable times I have is when I'm spending time with my family in a nice, relaxing environment and where we can just have fun and not deal with the stresses of work or life.
What's a movie that you could watch every single day?
I like all kinds of movies. I'm not sure that there's any movie that I could watch every day. That would be a lot of I could probably watch movies every day, but I'm not sure if there's any one movie that I could watch every day. But I do like lots of different types of movies. I'm big into action thrillers like the Jason Bourne, sagas and those types of things. But I also like a great comedy like Princess Bride, or I even like the old movies like Casablanca and those things. So I like all types of movies, but I'm not sure that there's one I could watch every day.
So Tennessee's famous for its barbecue, as everyone knows. What's your all-time favorite food?
My all-time favorite food is ice cream. Ice cream, I love ice cream, but for substance, I think my all-time favorite food is spaghetti. That's what I've always loved eating as a kid and growing up. I love spaghetti, and my wife makes an incredible spaghetti casserole that I love. So,
finally, you travel around the state just as much as I do. What is your go-to music genre in the car, or just what's on the radio in the car? I get a lot of podcast answers, so I had to change that question a little bit.
I understand. Well, I do spend a lot of time in the car, and too often I'm working when I'm in the car, talking to people on the phone and that type of stuff. And I do like to listen to audiobooks and podcasts. But when I'm listening to music, I love all types of music. I grew up, my kids like to say, you grew up in the 1900s, Dad. So I did grow up in the 1900s. And so I grew up listening to my parents' music, which was from the 50s and 60s, and my older siblings' music from the 70s. I kind of grew up in the 80s, and then I have kids, and they listened, to the 2000s music. So I've listened to it all. I've been to lots of dance competitions and baton competitions where you hear it all. But I think if I'm flipping through the radio station, if I come across a good 1970s, 80s rock or pop station, that's probably where I'm going to sit for a little while and listen to the music from my childhood.
Jim, thanks so much for joining me today. We've worked together for several years now. It's been a pleasure to finally sit down and talk to you. Thank you for your time on Tennessee Court Talk and your service to the state.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you for all that you do. And it's great to spend time with you today.
Thank you. To learn more about the Tennessee court system, visit tncourts.gov and listen to more episodes of Tennessee Court Talk on all major podcast platforms.